Hello and welcome to the Speak British English live stream. This stream takes place every Saturday at 12 p.m. UK time, and it's an opportunity for you to ask me any questions you have about British English, grammar and pronunciation, or anything else. If you're there watching now, then please leave a comment with your name. Tell me a bit about yourself, tell me about your English goals, tell me about your favorite videos on this channel, and if you have any questions, then now is the time to ask. Okay? So, yes, welcome. So today we're going to look at a sample of spoken English that was sent to me by one of my subscribers, Elena or Elena. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. If you're watching, then thank you very much for submitting that sample. Elena also asked a few questions. So first, we're going to answer those questions. Then we're going to review her sample of English. And then once we've done that, we're going to do what we did last week, and we're going to look at some written English that was submitted to me by a subscriber. Okay? So, these questions. Well, the first question that Elena asked was in relation to the difference between the diphthong air and the monophthong air. Okay, this is something that I talked about in one of my other YouTube videos, and it's something that I talk about in my course, The Vowels of British English, which you should all make sure that you do. Okay? So, this is a pretty subtle point, so it's not surprising that Elena has been unable to quite understand what I was talking about. So, in English, we have this long vowel air. So, for example, we have the word air, as in the air that we breathe, fresh air. Okay, he was breathing air. We also have the word heir, pronounced the same way, which means a person who inherits. So your oldest child usually would be your heir, or maybe all of your children are your heirs because they inherit your stuff when you die. Okay. So that vowel occurs in a lot of English words. Some other examples would be hair, chair, as in I'm sitting on a chair, bear, as in the animal, stare, as in to look, or to, stairs that you go up, and so on. Now, a lot of English pronunciation resources that you might find on the internet or in a library or wherever, a lot of these resources will describe this sound as a diphthong, okay? And that's partly because of maybe outdated information, but it's also something to do with the script that we use, the so-called International Phonetic Alphabet. So in the International Phonetic Alphabet, we have a symbol. I ought to show you. Hold on a second. Let's see. Well, don't worry about it. So you have a symbol which is two symbols together because it's a diphthong, and it's the symbol for a schwa, which is like an upside down letter E. Okay, so it's the symbol for a schwa. No, I've got that wrong. It's like a letter E, a little lowercase e, and then the symbol for a schwa, which is the same thing but upside down. I'll put something in the comments so you can see. Okay, hold on a second. It's not working. It's unfortunate. Okay, never mind. Well, I'll show you that a bit later on. But anyway, in the standard phonetic script that's used to represent British English, the symbol that you see is has two parts. It's got a little lowercase e and then an upside down lowercase e. So that reinforces the idea that this sound is a diphthong. Okay? But in terms of sound, well, if you listen to older people, if you listen to people with grey hair, you know, old people, then you will often hear a sound like that, like this, air. Okay, so it's a diphthong that begins with an sound and then ends with an sound, also known as a schwa. So it's like that, air. Okay, air. So that is how older people will tend to pronounce words like air, the air that we breathe, or your hair, or you might be sitting on a chair. Okay, now it's quite subtle. They're not necessarily going to go air like that. It might be more like air, air. But if you listen to younger people, including me, you'll notice that we use just a long monophthong like this, air. Okay, not air, just air. So it's the same sound all the way through. Air. It ends with the same sound with which it begins. Okay, so we don't say chair, we say chair. And I always advise my students to do this sound this way. I think for some reason, people who are learning English as a second language tend to make that sound more like the old-fashioned diphthong. People who are learning English as a second language tend to go air like that. But if you can go air like that without doing a diphthong, you will sound more British. You'll sound less like a foreigner. Okay? Might seem strange because British people do this. A lot of British people go air. But the British people doing it and foreigners doing it is, you know, these are two slightly different things. So as a foreigner learning English as a second language, you will sound less like a foreigner if you do it like this, air, as opposed to air. Okay, so Elena, if you're watching, I hope that answered your question. I see that I have not received any comments yet. I hope that's not a problem with my stream. But if you are listening, then please do leave a comment, okay? Because it really means a lot to me when people interact. So please, if you're listening, just leave a comment to say hello. Tell me your name. Tell me where you're from. Tell me a bit about yourself. Tell me about your English goals. Tell me how you found this channel. Tell me about your favorite videos on this channel. And if you have any questions about English grammar or pronunciation, then please ask. Okay? And Elena, if you're watching, then please say hello. So that was your first question, Elena. Your second question was to do with using glottal stops when a t consonant occurs at the end of a phrase. Okay? So I've got a comment from SL. Okay, so SL, please tell me your name. I assume that SL is not your name. Okay, presumably it stands for something. But hello. Oh, sorry. I thought you said. I thought I saw Sri Lanka there. I thought you were saying hello. I'm from Sri Lanka. No, it's Lanka. Okay. Is that Lanka my student Lanka? I assume it is. If so, then hello. Nice of you to comment. If you've got any questions, then please ask. Okay, it's very helpful for you to ask questions because it gives me something to talk about. Okay. Anyway, so what was I saying? Yes, so Elena's second question concerned the t consonant when it comes at the end of a syllable. Okay, so sorry, not the end of a syllable, at the end of a phrase. So again, this is something I talk about a lot in my other videos and in my course. And for those of you who haven't seen it already, I suggest you watch my video on the glottal stop in regards to Emma Watson's speech. Okay, I've made, I think, 3 videos on Emma Watson. They haven't had many views. I do highly recommend you watch those videos. I think they're very good. You know, I tried very hard with those videos. They're pretty long and detailed, so do watch those videos. I've got another comment here. I had learned rhotic English, which means I used to sound the prominently. In trying the non-rhotic British English, I have an easier time doing the old-fashioned diphthong and find the modern way, presumably he's going to say, more difficult. Right, this is exactly what I was saying. For some reason, people who speak English as a second language, assuming that it would be fair to say you, Elevik, do speak English as a second language, because I know from talking to you before that you're from the Philippines, and a lot of Filipinos are really bilingual. I mean, I think for a lot of Filipinos, it's unfair to say that they speak English as a second language. I think it's a joint first language in many cases, but not all cases, certainly. Yes, he said it's harder to imitate. Ironically, many British people nowadays do that because it's easier on their mouth. Do what? Do the old way, air? I'm not sure. For me, having grown up in England, being relatively young, I would say that to my ear, hearing the air, it sounds old-fashioned. It sounds a little bit... if I was to do that, my British friends would notice. They would definitely notice. And they would think I was joking. Okay? They would think that I was putting on a voice for comic effect. Or if they didn't get the joke, they might think I was just being weird and pretentious. Okay? But if you listen to someone much older, then they will do that, and it will seem normal because we're used to hearing older people speaking in a slightly different way to how younger people do. Okay? For example, if you listen to someone like Helen Mirren. Okay? Helen Mirren, the actress, she's about 80 now, I think, or maybe 75. Yeah, maybe, no, not 80. More like, but she's in her 70s for sure. She's got a beautiful speaking voice. And if you listen very carefully, you'll notice that she does this air sound, okay? Whereas if you listen to Emma Watson, she doesn't. She does it like me, air, flat like that, you see. Okay, but there's a subtle thing, so it's not necessarily easy to hear it. So I can understand why Elena asked that question. Now, getting back to what I was talking about. Elena's second question was in regards to doing a glottal stop when a t sound occurs at the end of a syllable. Sorry, at the end of a phrase. So, as I've explained in my other videos and in my courses, we, British people, and not just British people, but native English speakers, perhaps particularly British people, but certainly native English speakers, often use a glottal stop in place of a normal t sound. Now, it's particularly important to do this when you're connecting a syllable ending in a t consonant to a syllable beginning with some other consonant, or including a t consonant. So when you have a t consonant at the end of a syllable, you can connect using a glottal stop, even if the next syllable also begins with a t sound. So if I say the phrase hot tea, I had a cup of hot tea. I'm still saying the t sound on the beginning of tea, but on the end of hot, I'm not making any t sound at all. I'm just doing a glottal stop. I had a cup of hot tea. Hot tea. That is how you do that. That's how you make that connection. If you go hot tea, it sounds very disjointed and unnatural. And also, you run the risk, if you're speaking English as a second language, you run the risk of sounding very Italian or Japanese or something. Like Italians tend to go, hot tea. I was drinking a hot tea. You see, hot tea. But it's not hot tea, it's hot tea. See, big difference. Japanese people do something like that as well. They go, hot tea. But it's not hot, it's just hot, like that. Now, the question that Elena asked is a very good question, although I have answered it before. And the question is, do we do this at the end of a phrase? In fact, specifically her question was, is this considered to be a bad habit? Okay, which is a good question because that implies that she knows that people do that, but she's not sure how other British people judge that, how we perceive it. how we react to it. And my answer is that actually it's perfectly fine. And I would encourage you, if you are learning English as a second language, I would encourage you to do that. You see, I just did it there. I would encourage you to do that. You see, I do it. I just did it again. I do it. You see, I do it all the time. You probably wouldn't even notice if I hadn't pointed it out. You see, I did it again there. So yes, British people will do that, and it's absolutely fine. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. And then your other question was about aspiration in regards to the ch consonant. Now, I may have made a mistake here, because in the past I have implied that the consonant sound ch is aspirated. Okay, now aspiration in this context refers to a burst of air as part of certain consonant sounds, in particular the sounds t, p, and k when they come at the beginning of a syllable. Okay, in particular we do this on stressed syllables. So I could say something like, she has a nice car. Now notice that when I say car, there's a clear breath in between the beginning of the k sound and the beginning of the vowel. Car. If I slow it down and exaggerate, you get something like car, like that. Okay. Similarly, if I use a p sound, I could say, I had a pear. Okay, a pear is a kind of fruit. I had a pear. Pear. Like that. Or with a t sound, I could say something like, his shirt had a tear. Okay, it was ripped. His shirt had a tear. Now, in my course, The Consonants of British English, I think I teach that the sound ch can also be aspirated in that way. Well, ch is a bit different, but yes, when you're doing a ch sound at the beginning of a syllable, you could try aspirating it, and that may help you to get a better sound. But I think it really depends on the individual person. But if I demonstrate, if you take a word like chair, you know, I can go like this. Chair, you see? Chair, chair. He was sitting on a chair. Chair. But the ch sound is a different kind of consonant to the sounds t, p, and k. Okay? T, p, and k. These are what are called stops. Okay, so I probably get my terminology wrong, but t is called a alveolar stop. I think that's what it's called. And then p is called a labial stop or bilabial stop or something like that. And then k, I think it's called a velar stop. The terminology is not very important. The point is that they're all stops, which means that they involve blocking the airway and then releasing like that, sort of like clicking your fingers. Okay, but the sound ch is different because it's not a complete stop. It's more like a sort of a rubbing like that. Ch. There's a kind of friction, and so it's called I think it's called a fricative, or in this case an affricative. So it's a bit different, but you could say that there's aspiration in there. I'm not sure. Maybe if I was to make that course again, I would do that slightly differently. But it's certainly something that you can experiment with during your practice. The sound ch is an interesting consonant because in a way it's a cluster. Okay, we think of it as a unique consonant, but it's kind of a combination of two sounds, and that's reflected by the symbol that we use, which is like a letter T with a sort of funny S shape. So it's got two symbols. I mean, if you think about the sound that you have at the beginning of a word like true, okay, true, we would write that with just a a t symbol followed by an symbol, and we would think of it as a cluster, meaning that it's two consonants stuck together. But you can imagine that some linguist might decide that this should really be thought of as a single unique consonant, and then you could have a symbol just to represent that sound. And then the question is, well, is it aspirated? Because you've got a t consonant, and then you've got an but the aspiration from the t consonant carries over into the so you get this sound like but in the case of sounds like t and p, because they're just a single stop, a single consonant sound, the aspiration occurs between the consonant and the vowel. So it's different. It's perceived differently. You get that clear sound in between the consonant and the vowel. Park, like that. But if I say tree, it's a bit different. I'm not going tree like that, because the aspiration is contained in the sound itself, in the consonant. Tree, like that. Okay, because the aspiration is really coming from the first part of the consonant and kind of bleeding into the second part of the consonant. And you could say that the sound ch is like that, because you've got a sort of a t at the beginning, and then you've got this sh sound. So maybe the aspiration from the t is carrying over into the ch. So yeah, it's an interesting question. But anyway, what was the last question that she asked? Was that it? No, I've done 3 questions, haven't I? Yeah, that was all the questions. So Elena, if you're listening, please leave a comment. But I hope that answered your question. Now we've got another question here, I think, from Lanka. So, can you explain more about triphthongs? I watched your videos, but I still can't understand how to pronounce it correctly. Yeah. Okay, so I am what you might call a triphthong skeptic. I'm not sure I even believe that triphthongs are a real thing. I think they're inherently confusing. You see, the thing is, if you think about monophthongs, diphthongs, and triphthongs, the central idea with all 3 is that they constitute a single syllable. So a monophthong is where you have one vowel sound in one syllable. Okay, so if we take the sound and then we have a word like cut. Okay, that's a monophthong because we've got one syllable there, and we've got the sound in there, which is a single vowel. And then you could have a diphthong, which is where you have 2 vowels in one syllable. So if you take the sound I, as in the word I, we perceive that as one syllable, but it's really 2 vowels. It's R-E, I-E, okay? But clearly one syllable. It sounds like one syllable, okay? But with triphthongs, it's a bit different. If you take the triphthong, let's say, hour. Now, when you just hear me go hour, does that really sound like one syllable? I think for a lot of people, it seems much more like 2 syllables than one syllable. Hour, da-da, hour, 1, 2. Okay? And the reason the reason we perceive it as more of a 2-syllable sound is because when you go ow, your lips come together like that. And then when you go and they open, that's essentially a w sound, and a w is a consonant. If you put a consonant in the middle of 2 vowels, you've got 2 syllables. That's what syllables are. Syllables are vowel sounds separated by consonant sounds. So if I go hour, sounds like 2 syllables. And there are lots of words like that which we all agree are 2 syllables. If I say I had a shower this morning, shower, we think of that as 2 syllables. Power, tower, etc., etc. Right, like as Alanka says here, sounds like it's connected with a word. Exactly. So then you've got this situation where you think, for it to be a triphthong, it has to be 1 syllable, which means I need to somehow get rid of the w sound. Now, to do that, I need to blend the sounds a lot more. So I need to do something like this. Ah. Ah. I waited for 1 hour. You see? I waited for 1 hour. He was an hour late. He was an hour late. Okay? Now, if I say ah, like that, that sounds a lot more like one syllable. Okay? Saying that that's 2 syllables is perhaps it doesn't make sense. Hour doesn't really sound like 2 syllables. That sounds much more like 1 syllable. But is it 3 vowel sounds? I would argue not really. I would say it's more like a diphthong. Okay, in order to make it sound like 1 syllable, I've had to pronounce this so-called triphthong as really a diphthong, because I'm really just going from an ah to an ah, like that, ah. I waited for 1 hour. Okay, so it's a paradox. If it's a triphthong, then it's got 3 vowel sounds. But if it's got 3 vowel sounds, a, oo, and then because of the way your lips come together in the middle, it actually sounds like 2 syllables. So to make it sound like 1 syllable, I have to remove the middle, and then it's really a diphthong, not a triphthong. Okay. If we take the other common triphthong, aya, we've got the same problem. Aya. Does that really sound like 1 syllable? Aya. I think a lot of people would say that's 2 syllables. And again, there are lots of words in English which sound like that, and which we all agree have 2 syllables. If I say higher, go higher, go higher, I think most people would agree that's 2 syllables. We've got the word high, which is 1 syllable, and then the suffix which is 1 syllable. So that makes 2 syllables, higher. But then if you take a word like fire, a lot of people would argue that that's 1 syllable with a triphthong, but is there really any difference? So we've got the same paradox. When I go aya with clearly 3 vowel sounds, e, aya, because of the way my tongue moves when I go aya, it sounds like there's a y consonant in the middle. A y sound, like in the word yes or you. And again, when you have a consonant between 2 vowels, that makes it sound like 2 syllables, because syllables are vowel sounds separated by consonant sounds. Okay? So then if I want to make it sound more like 1 syllable, I need to make that y sound a lot more subtle. And so I do something like this. Ire. Ire. You see? Fire. Put out the fire. But now, really, I'm just doing a diphthong, because I'm going from to straight from to That's 2 vowels, not 3. Ire. Ire. So it's a paradox. So that's the long answer, but in regards to your question, Lanka, the short answer is I wouldn't worry about it too much. There's a reason why I put that stuff right at the end of that course. Okay, I've got a comment here from Machiavelli, Mr. Machiavelli. Is that supposed to be like Machiavelli? Machiavelli, the Italian politician. Anyway, hi, how are you doing? I got a question, please. Do some British have the cup vowel in the word what? Okay, that's a good question. I think a better example might be the word one, as in 1, 2, 3. If you look in the dictionary, it's quite likely that you will see that the dictionary says that the word one, as in 1, 2, 3, should be pronounced with the vowel okay, as in the word cup. Okay, 1, 2, 3. In my opinion, that is outdated information. It's very much like what I was talking about right at the beginning in regards to the sound air. Okay, if you look at resources on the internet, they will tell you that we have this diphthong air, but actually only old people use that, and anyone under the age of about 70 just goes air. Okay, so yes, some people will say one, like that, or what, maybe. I'm not so sure about the word what, but certainly with the word one, that is true. Some people will say one, just like we say once. But most people, in my experience, say one. That's how I say it, one, with an O vowel. But I do say once with a vowel, definitely. Not once, but once. Okay? So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so anyone else who's listening, please leave a comment. Tell me your name. Tell me a bit about yourself. Tell me where you're from. And if you've got any questions, please ask. So let's move on. So Elena, who asked these questions, or Elena, she also submitted a bit of audio. Okay, so let's listen to that.
My brother's changed so much since he was a teenager. He used to be so moody. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. He'd sit and look out of the window as if no one else was there. And he would insist on locking himself in his room for hours on end. My mother would really worry about him. Now he'll spend hours chatting to Mum in the kitchen, or the two of them will go for long walks in the woods. But he'll still ignore anyone who tries to give him any advice.
Okay, so I'm sure you will all agree that that was very good. Okay, I think that sounded like someone who's lived in the UK for a long time. Now, Elena doesn't seem to be here watching, so she can't comment on this. But I don't think Elena lives in the UK. She didn't mention it. So whatever she's been doing in order to improve her pronunciation, it's working very well. Okay, she sounds very good, very much like a British person. So let's go through it line by line and see if we can improve anything. Okay, let's try this again.
My brother's changed so much since he was a teenager. He used to be so moody. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him.
Okay, so the first thing I'd say is that, of course, the recording is not very good, which is unfortunate, but I would say it's a bit slow and lacking energy. Okay, now speaking slowly is okay, and perhaps she's deliberately doing it slowly in order to better demonstrate her pronunciation. But you've got to think about the intent of the writer if you're reading something. Okay, so she's reading a piece of text that's been written by somebody, and it's supposed to express something. So I would do it with a lot more energy. My brother's changed so much since he was a teenager. He used to be so moody. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. Okay, I'd do it like that with a bit more energy instead of, my brother's changed so much since he was a teenager. You see, it's a bit sleepy. But really very good. I mean, it's difficult to find anything in particular to fault. Regarding your intonation, there's one very minor, subtle detail that we can talk about. Let's just listen to that first bit again.
My brother's changed so much since he was a teenager. He used to be so moody. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him.
Right. So that last part, he'd never listened to anything anyone said to him. So firstly, when you say the word to, as in listen to, if you're connecting, then you can use an oo sound if you're connecting to a vowel, like to anything. But if you're not connecting, then you can just say t like this. Let's just listen to how she does that bit again.
He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him.
Right. So, Elena, what you've done there is you've said he'd never listened to anything. To anything. Now, what I would recommend is you try and say to anything. to anything, you see? And I'm sort of using a w sound to make the connection, to anything. If you want to pause, that's okay. But then I would recommend you use a schwa and you say t. So you could do this. He'd never listen to anything, to anything. He'd never listen to anything. Okay? Now, I think it's better to say to anything, but that's not the same as saying to anything. If you stop, it sounds a little bit unnatural. He'd never listen to anything. No, he'd never listen to anything, or he'd never listen to anything. Okay, so that's a minor point. And also the intonation with which you say anything anyone said to him. Let's just listen again to how you did that.
He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him.
Right, so you've done it like this. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. To anything anyone said to him. Now, I would do it like this. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. Anything anyone said to him. Okay? What you did was anything anyone said to him. Anything anyone said to him. I would go anything anyone said to him. Now, as for why, well, that's a little bit complicated. If you stress two words in a row like that, anything anyone said to him, well, sometimes we do that. You can definitely stress two words in a row sometimes if those two words both need stress. But here, you don't really need to stress the word anyone. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. Okay? The stress is really on the word said. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. But anyone doesn't need to be stressed so much. So you did this. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. Anything anyone said to him. But I would go to anything anyone said to him. Okay? It's a subtle point. Very subtle, but these are the little things that are going to give away the fact that you're not a native English speaker, because other than that, you know, your pronunciation is very good. Okay? So I'm really picking on very small points here, but I think that a native English speaker, a British person, would say he'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. Okay, I hope that's clear. Let's listen to the next part.
He'd sit and look out of the window as if no one else was there, and he would insist on locking himself in his room for hours on end. My mother would really worry about him.
Okay, so again, it's all very good. There are only some very... To criticize it, I really have to look for tiny little details, but I suppose that's what we're here for. Now, let's listen to that one more time.
In his room for hours on end.
Hold on a minute.
And he would insist on locking himself.
No, go back
He
a bit.
used to be so moody. He'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. He'd sit and look out of the window.
Right, he'd sit and look out of the window. Now, again, the recording is not brilliant, but I think you need a bit more energy, particularly at the beginning, on the first word of a sentence. So when you make that sound on he'd, it just needs to be a bit clearer. He'd sit and look out of the window as if no one else was there. Okay, so be a bit stronger on the beginning when you say he'd.
Said to him. He'd sit and look out of the window as if no...
Right. Now, also, you've paused after the word look. You said he'd sit and look out of the window. He'd sit and look out of the window. Now, that's fine, but remember that it's not really look and then out of the window. It's look out of the window. Okay, you can think of look out of the window as a sort of phrasal verb. He was looking out of the window. He wasn't just looking out of the window. He was looking out of the window. Okay, I hope that's clear. So it would be better if you said he'd sit and look out of the window as if no one else was there. Okay, listen again.
sit and look out of the window as if no one else was there.
You see, you should have connected a bit better there. And I noticed that when you say there, it's excellent, but it does sound a little bit too diphthongal, a little bit old-fashioned. There, as if no one else was there, like that. So just try to make it very monophthongal, as if no one else was there, like that. Listen again.
He'd sit and look out of the window as if no one else was there, and he would insist on locking himself in his room for hours on end.
Good. So he would insist on locking himself in his room for hours on end. I noticed that you put the accent on would. You said, and he would insist on locking himself in his room. I think it would sound better to put the accent on insist. And he would insist on locking himself in his room. So insist and locking. Okay, locking has an accent. Insist has an accent. And he would insist on locking himself in his room for hours on end. Okay, rather than, and he would insist. Again, this is a very subtle point, but overall you're very good. So I have to pick on little things like that.
And he would insist on locking himself in his room for hours on end. My mother would really worry about him.
Good. My mother would really worry about him. So, again, you're speaking rather slowly. Now, when you say about him, well, generally speaking, when we connect a syllable ending with a t sound to a syllable beginning with a consonant sound, as I discussed at the beginning of this stream, we'll use a glottal stop. And that's what we've got here. We've got a h sound on the beginning of him, and we've got a t consonant at the end of about. So the basic rule would lead us to do it like this. About him. About him. My mother would really worry about him. Okay? You don't need to say about him. About him. About him. Use a glottal stop. Now, because the H sound is so insubstantial, it's just a breath, we can bend the rules here. When you're connecting a t consonant to an H sound, you can treat that word as if it just begins with a vowel. So I could say about him as opposed to about him. This is particularly effective with an aspirated sound like a t or a p sound or a k sound, or perhaps even a ch sound. This is especially effective with an aspirated sound because when you go, for example, about him, even if you're not really pronouncing the H sound, it still sounds like there's an H there because of the aspiration from the t sound. About him. Okay? So then the question is, when is it better to do it in the normal way, about him, and when is it better to do it in the kind of cheating way, about him? Well, I would say that if the word beginning with the H sound is stressed, if it's like a really important key word that you're stressing, then you should use the glottal stop. About him, for example. But if you're not stressing that word, then you can connect with a t sound, about him. Now here, I don't think we're stressing the word him, so it's fine to say about him, which is what you've done. However, because you're speaking so slowly, I think it sounds a little bit too noticeable. So you're doing it really slow like this. My mother would really worry about him. And it's too noticeable, about him. So if you're speaking at that speed, I would recommend doing it like this. My mother would really worry about him. Okay? Naturally, I would do it like that if I was speaking slowly in that way. Okay, listen again.
Locking himself in his room for hours on end. My mother would really worry about him. Now he'll spend hours chatting to Mum in the kitchen, or the two of them will go for long walks in the woods.
Good. Okay. No particular problems there. Let me just listen very carefully to that one more time.
Hours chatting to Mum in the
Okay, just go
kitchen.
back a bit.
room for hours on end. My mother would really worry about him.
Okay.
Now he'll spend hours chatting to Mum in the kitchen.
Okay. So the audio is not very clear, but when you say chatting to Mum, it sounds like you may have said chatting to Mum, as opposed to chatting to Mum. So be very careful about that. I'll show you my face. Oops. So, this is a common mistake. I'm not sure if you've actually made this mistake here. It might just be that the audio is not very clear. But for anyone else watching, when you have we usually just call it like an ing ending or just an ng ending. But to be more precise, when you have the sound ng at the end of a word, you must pronounce it in that way. You can't replace it with an n sound. A lot of native English speakers will do that. Almost everybody does it sometimes, including me. But it's a bad habit. And if you're learning English as a second language, you should really avoid doing that. Okay. So here, for example, it sounded a bit like Elena said.
My brother's changed so much since he was a teenager.
It sounded like she said chatting to Mum, but it should be chatting to Mum. Okay? So instead of chatting to Mum, it should be chatting to Mum. But again, I'm not sure if she's actually made that mistake. It could just be the audio. So let's see if I can find that part again.
And he wouldn't sit alone. Now he'll spend hours chatting to Mum in the kitchen, or the two of them will go for long walks in the woods.
Yes. And the two of them, when you're connecting to of, you could make the connection a bit stronger. Just use that w sound. Two of them, instead of just two of them, or the two of them. Okay, you could make your diction a bit stronger. Speak with a bit more emphasis. Okay, it sounds very relaxed, a little bit too relaxed. Or the two of them will go for long walks. Maybe more like, or the two of them, or the two of them. Make it a bit clearer. But again, it's really very good.
But he'll still ignore anyone who tries to give him any advice.
Right. And he'll still... but he'll still ignore anyone who tries to give him any advice. So this is very much like what happened when you said anything anyone said to him. So there you went, he'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. But it should be, he'd never listen to anything anyone said to him. And here you've said, he'd still ignore anyone who tries to give him any advice. Very similar pattern. And I would say, but he'd still ignore anyone who tried to give him any advice. Like that, advice. Not any advice, but any advice. Okay? So like this. But he'd still ignore... Is it he'll? Yes. But he'll still ignore anyone who tries to give him any advice. Okay? So I hope that's helpful. These are all subtle points to do with intonation. But yeah, that was very good. So anyone who wants... I'll show you my face again. So if you want me to review your pronunciation, then please share a recording with me. Okay? You can make a video recording or an audio recording. Nowadays, it's very easy to make high quality recordings. If you've got a phone, if you've got a smartphone, you can just record it on that. Okay? I would say if you're going to make a recording, use your phone rather than your computer, because phones tend to have better equipment. They're just better quality. Okay? So, yes, if you want me to review your English, then share a recording with me. Use the link in the description. Follow the link in the description and share something. And also, if you want me to look at your grammar, then you can share something with me and I'll take a look at your grammar. Okay? So, we've got 10 minutes. Let's see. I've got another question here. Would you please explain the changes that happened to the vowel in got for British people has lost its roundness. Is it going American? God. I don't think so. I'm not really sure what you mean. Please explain the changes that happened to the vowel in got. The O vowel. I don't think there is any change. I don't know where you've heard this. Maybe if you've got a link or a quotation, something from somewhere else that says this, then I'll look into it. But as far as I'm concerned, well, I just don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're referring to. So yes, I don't think that the O vowel is going American. But what I can talk about is the difference between the British vowels and American vowels in this particular regard. Okay. Generally speaking, I'm not qualified to talk about American English, American pronunciation, but this is one thing where at least I can give you the British perspective. So to me, as a British person, when I listen to Americans speaking English, it seems to me that they do not have the vowel O. They simply don't have it. So if you take the words, for example, the word hot as in the opposite of cold, and then you compare it to the word hut, as in a shelter, like Pizza Hut. Well, for a British person, those words are clearly different. One has the vowel O, the other has the vowel A. Okay? Hot, hut. I got a hot pizza from Pizza Hut. They're not the same. You couldn't say I got a hut pizza from Pizza Hut. That sounds completely wrong. But it seems to me that for Americans, there is no difference. I got a hot pizza from Pizza Hut. They're the same. Now, if there are any Americans listening, perhaps you disagree. Maybe it's a subtle difference that I'm not taking into account. But I really think that whether it's hot or hut, it's going to have the same vowel. So yes, Americans, they don't really do an O sound. They'll just do an But British people use an O sound. Now, your question, Mr. Machiavelli, your question implies that British people are starting to do O words with more of an sound like Americans. I haven't noticed this, so I don't think it's true, but maybe it is. Okay. So if you send me some more information on that, I'll look into it. Okay. So we've still got a few minutes. I will have to sign off in about 7 minutes because I have another appointment. But so if you've got any questions, then now's the time to ask. But what we can do is just do a little bit of English grammar stuff. Okay, so I've got a piece of text here written by someone called Nadia. So we can look at this for a few minutes and see if there are any mistakes that we can correct. Okay, so it says, as we move forward the 21st century, the master word of globalization increasingly looms as an all-consuming process capable of reshaping the world we live in. Okay. Let's just isolate this a bit. As we move forward the 21st century. Well, if we just look at that part, if we move forward the 21st century, someone leave a comment if you've got an idea about how we could make that sound better. Okay, it seems a little bit wrong, doesn't it? As we move forward the 21st century, there's something missing. So if you've got any idea what I mean, then please leave a comment. Then the next part, the master word of globalization increasingly looms as an all-consuming process capable of reshaping the world we live in. Okay, so this is obviously an academic essay that's been submitted. And students writing academic essays often write too much. That's my opinion. Because you're trying to sound very grown up. You're trying to sound very academic and clever. But I would say that it's better to try to be, to keep everything simple. I've got a comment here. Let me just quickly look at that. Do you have any your records of casual phrases to listen and repeat? Emma Watson speaks too fast. So that's Lanka, isn't it? Well, Lanka, remember that you are a full member, so just come to the group classes. I'm still doing the group classes every Sunday, and often no one shows up. So make sure you come to the group class, and we can do all sorts of different exercises. Okay, that's the benefit. So for anyone else, if you become a full member, if you follow the link in the description and you join my school and you become a paying member with a monthly subscription, okay, it's not very much, it's only £16 a month, then in addition to all of the online materials, you also get to join my group classes that take place every Sunday at this time on Zoom. So that's a live class where you can talk to me face to face, okay, and we can do various exercises and so on, okay. So Lanka, come to the class. Anyway, let's go back to what we're looking at. So, yeah, I'm waiting for a comment. Someone leave a comment as to how we can improve this sentence. As we move forward the 21st century, how can we improve this clause? And then the second part, the master word of globalization. Well, firstly, if you want to talk about a word, then you should use some speech marks like that. The master word of globalization. But this part really isn't necessary, isn't it? Is it? You're just trying to sound clever. The master word of globalization. Just delete it. You don't need it. Okay, globalization increasingly looms. Increasingly looms. Well, why increasingly? Why not just say looms? Okay. Globalization looms as an all-consuming process capable of reshaping the world we live in. Globalization, as we move forward the 21st century, globalization, I mean, the thing with the word looms is that it's very negative sounding. So you've already established, just by using the word looms, that you have a kind of anti-globalization position, but that's not actually very academic. To be academic, you've got to be a little bit more, a little bit more even. Okay, dispassionate. Don't pick a side. If you do pick a side, it should be at the end when you make your argument, and there you go. You see, this is my argument. This is why you should be afraid. But at the very beginning, you should not be quite so one-sided, okay? So as we move forward the 21st century, globalization, why not just say globalization is capable of reshaping the world we live in? Hey, that sounds a lot better to me. And no one's answered my question, but as we move forward the 21st century, I would say as we move forward with the 21st century, or maybe as we move forward in the 21st century. Okay, but I prefer with, actually. As we move forward with the 21st century, globalization is capable of reshaping the world we live in. Yeah, it still doesn't sound perfect, but I think the central lesson here is that you should just focus on being clear. If you're writing academic work, just focus on being clear and coherent. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Okay, anyway, I really have to sign off now because I've actually got I've got a student, got a class. So I do have to go. Time flies during these streams. But we'll do more of this next time. Please do submit, share some recordings of yourself speaking, and I will review those. I think it's fun to do that. And think of some more questions. Okay, remember to like, subscribe, share this video. Remember to follow the link to my school, join my school, become a paying member, and that way you get all the materials and you can join the live classes. And yeah, so I'll see you next time. Okay, bye bye.